Hi, Tommy Heffernan, veterinary consultant here. In this short-ish video, I'm going to talk about some other applications as calves go to pasture for precision microbes, a little bit about summer scour syndrome, a topic I've covered many times before, a lot of, I suppose, research ongoing, some questions to be answered. So in this video, I'm going to cover some of that. I think first and foremost, from myself and all the team at Precision Microbes, huge thanks to everybody out there for the support this year. We're a small Irish company. We've developed research in Ireland, manufacture in Ireland, so it's been really good to see the positive feedback, and it's been phenomenal. Go to the website and hear our customer stories, particularly with long-term use in calves, less diarrhea, vets talking about reducing antibiotics, and these are tools, very effective tools, along with good management and veterinary advice. We often get questions about more data on the calf product. I have a huge amount of trial work done myself, but it's nice to see independent trial work coming in from other places other than ourselves. This was a study done in WIT last year by a student looking at treatment with precision microbes on dairy beef calves versus control. We saw 115 grams a day difference. So we're really seeing that, particularly on calves on longer term treatments. We also had a study finished 2-3 weeks ago, and thankfully Precision Microbes treatment group 1, so again average daily gain, and particularly from 8 to 13 weeks, these calves run for 13 weeks, a huge difference on average daily gain, because I mean this, what the product was designed for was to optimize gut health and performance. So really excited to see that come true. Applications for older calves, I suppose, with later calves going out to grass, coccidiosis and parasites are some of the big challenges we'll see now. Summer scour syndrome, I'm going to talk a good bit about that. I'm doing a lot of work in older stock and research work there on rumen health, and I think that will be an interesting space. Certainly for the calf product, it's the long-term usage now. We're really seeing the benefit of feeding precision microbes for longer and longer during the weaning period and the entire calf pre-weaning period. But just at the moment, I suppose, I don't want to pigeonhole precision microbes on the gut stabilization piece because it is really designed for long-term feeding, but we are seeing that for gut stabilization, so if you've got calves that are recovering from coccidiosis, parasites or other conditions, the product can still be used to help with stabilization. The dose rate for maybe older weaned calves is, depending on weight, 60 to 80 mils orally. If they're on milk, you can give it through milk. It can be fed through meals. So we have a number of farms, obviously, if calves outdoors, maybe give us the first dose orally, and then it can be put on the top of meal daily. One of the beauties about the product is it's a fermented product. Calves love the taste of it. So a number of farms now, we're going into our third season of calves outside, have been, have used it with this protocol. So it can be used in recovery from other digestive upsets that we'll see in grazing calves. I'm going to talk about summer scour syndrome, but I just want to give people a picture, and why I'm very fascinated with microbes, aside from the precision microbe story, is when we look at the future of grazing and livestock, and we look at the importance of soil health. Now, soil health is coming into the fore and has been recognized as a really important topic, and that everything is built up from the soil. And the soil is a complete ecosystem. I talk a lot about microbes in the digestive tract, but when we look in the soil microbiota, so the trillions and trillions of microbes in soil. So if we take a tablespoon or teaspoon of soil, it's got the same amount of microbes as we have people in the world. So, but these microbes are playing a really important role in soil, and we're going to hear more and more about this because science is catching up. We can measure some of this stuff now, and it's getting really interesting when we look at soil health and the impact of improving soil health, reduction of nitrogen, the improvement in plant health, and the flow of those nutrients from soil to plant to animal to humans. Again, if we look at in the root of the plant exudes 30% plus of its energy through the root. It's doing this very purposely to feed the soil microbiota, and its viruses, bacteria, protozoa, fungi particularly are important as well. But the beneficial bacteria in soil play an important role for protection and nutrition of the plant. They also play a key role when it comes to mineral absorption. So there's active and passive transfer of minerals. So a healthy soil network is really important, driven, I suppose, primarily, but we think about having roots in the soil for long periods of time and diversity of root length. And that's why mixed species swards, even they have challenges, are really interesting. We look at some of the current challenges. I'm going to talk about summer scour syndrome, but when we see more intensive grazing, things like cows eating stones, subacute ruminal acidosis, maybe milk drop in cows, some conditions new conditions we might be seeing. We've got to think about soil health, and I'm not advocating that everyone has to become a soil health farmer. It's just an interesting topic that we need to keep an eye on, because when we think about microbes, they play a key role in soil health, in the nutrition, immunity and protection. And then when we get into our ruminant animals, they're equally important in the hindgut, and of course we know that the rumen's a large microbial fermentation vat. So when we look at some of the future challenges for grazing and maybe where we need to be looking at, I think we do need to be thinking about microbes, because they have a role all the way to play, from soil to grazing to animals to ourselves and our own gut microbiota. Again, if we look at grass at this time of year, and particularly when I go on to talk about summer scour syndrome, some of the challenges is with monocultures is, they can be quite high in nitrogen or use a lot of nitrogen. They are low in fibre, so when we peak grass growth, you get, particularly with nitrogen fertilizer application, you get a leafy plant, a very leafy plant, but it can be lower in fibre. And fibre is really important when we think about rumen and gut health. They can be quite high in conjugated linoleic acids, which are essentially oils. And if we think about that fast-growing plant and a shorter root, and we think of some of the mineral issues we might be seeing, cows eating stones as an example, it's really important we think about these are some of the challenges, and we certainly can supplement our cows around these areas. And when I think about summer scour syndrome, I'll be primarily talking about Precision Microbes helping in the recovery phase. But I think the future thinking, even though I'm involved with Precision Microbes, is around grazing strategies that are going to reduce these challenges. And again, this is, look, some of my theories on it and some of the things I've learned or taught about. There's a lot more research needed. When we think about summer scour syndrome, Precision Microbes has a role to play in affected calves. We've had 2 seasons now of vet practices using it here. Some vet practices actually started in 2021, late summer. It was their first time using the product, and they use it for this application. And it does play a role in helping calves recover. I'm going to talk about the potential causes of summer scour syndrome, the symptoms, something about the treatment regimes. And again, for me, even though Precision Microbes is an aid and help, which is actually an indicator that what might be happening, but it's an aid and a help, we do need to think about long-term strategies to eliminate it as a challenge on farm. So why is it occurring? If we look at the prevalence, it depends on what areas you're in, but certainly I have seen an increase in it from healthy calves to maybe mildly affected groups of calves to your severe calf on the right-hand side. Over the last 13, 14 years that I've been talking about it, have certainly seen an increase in the prevalence on farm. There's certainly things we can do around grazing strategies that reduce the risk, but the prevalence seems to be, in my opinion, I've been saying for a long time, increasing year on year. So in 2008, 2010, I started seeing more of it. Started talking to other vets who were seeing it. We had lots of theories. There still is lots of theories around it. I don't think we've got a definition of what might be occurring. I know there's a group that I had a tiny bit of involvement with, but there are working researchers from New Zealand, UK, Australia and Ireland are working on this. So we are making progress. When we think about the symptoms of summer scour syndrome, these are these calves that might have been wormed, treated for coccidiosis, but are going backwards, pretty profuse diarrhea, losing weight, can lose it quite rapidly on the severe edge. So if we had 50 calves in a group, that could be 5 to 10% of that group, maybe more. They often present like this calf here, a classical case, ulcers in the mouth, ulcers in the esophagus as well. So pretty common symptoms we can see around summer scour syndrome, even though we haven't defined exactly what's happening. Some of the theories around it, a lot of work has been done. Is it an infectious agent we're missing? I think talking to researchers now, this has been sidelined as, there's no conclusive evidence here. I mean, people will still argue that this is not a big problem. Obviously, grazing livestock, we're lucky to be able to do it in Ireland. It's a huge advantage. But I think we're always looking at how maybe the evolution of grazing, how good we've got at growing grass. That does bring challenges with it. A lot of people will talk about copper and maybe high molybdenosis. That's been a theory for a while, and certainly in some calves with very high molybdenosis and copper lockup, they'll respond to copper. One of the other theories, and I think it definitely plays a role, is poor weaning. So are we seeing this in older, later weaned calves that don't have full rumen development? And my theories on rumen development have somewhat changed as well. When I look at potentially, I think looking at maybe the level of meal feeding we'll wean calves on. So I've gone from that recommended kilo a day of meal that you can wean calves to 1.5 kilos minimum, or nearly 2 kilos, and that has helped as well. But let's go back to biology and understand rumen development and think about the evolution of grazing and why there might be some challenges that summer scour might be causing summer scour, some of Tommy's theories. Again, if we go back to rumen development, and I always go back to basic biology, and we think about what does a normal rumen develop, for looking at normal weaning process for a cow and calf, it can take 8 to 12 months. The calf starts ingesting some fiber, they're getting some sugars and starch, and that rumen development process is slow. Dairy farming, we've expedited that process, and we've done a really good job at being able to do that. And we know to help with rumen development, we need starch for rumen development and fiber for that scratch effect. And we've got really good at intakes of concentrates, meal, weaning down milk, and weaning calves well. The thing we need to know about calves, though, when we go out to grass, is there's a couple of things. If we've got poor weaning, well, then we've got a poorly developed rumen. The rumen's still developing even post-weaning. We've got a poorly developed rumen, which is a challenge. Calves also are selective grazers. So if they go into a big field of grass, they're going to end up selectively nibbling the tops of the leaf of the plant. That's what they will naturally do. And that grass often has twice the protein, really low fiber, and higher in oil. So that's kind of feeding into the challenges that are there. When it comes to minerals and copper, well, if we think about the soil microbiome as well, and we think about soil structure, well, some of the mineral issues we might see in calves and in cows as well could be related to soil health and structure and that absorption. Common things are still common. Parasites, coccidiosis are key things. But what essentially we're doing for the calf, even if we get weaning right, is we're really changing the diet when they go out to grass, particularly with lush grass. So when we have times like it is today now, growth rates are really taking off. Nitrogen might have been applied. That grass is lower in fiber, it's fast growing, and it's high in conjugated linoleic acids. And these linoleic acids are important because they're oils and they're quite hard, in my experience and what the research I've read on rumen health as well. So again, my own theories. So again, if we look at optimal biology, if we look at development, look at the stress factors and risks that are there, well, then we can see how potentially that summer scour syndrome is increasing with the grazing strategies we're currently using. Again, we often think about summer scour syndrome and focus on maybe the rumen and how the rumen goes backwards, but when you have a poorly functioning rumen, or a rumen that's been had a challenge, well, it will have an indirect or direct effect on the hindgut, and the hindgut's that portion of the intestine from the rumen to the anus. So that's still a very important part, and that's why we might be seeing the profuse diarrhea. Again, when I see the response to calves with summer scour syndrome with Precision Microbes as an aid in supporting gut stabilization, we're targeting primarily the hindgut. It would make sense that it's both the rumen and the hindgut that's affected. And if we think about the hindgut actually of the calf at grass, or the young ruminant, well, it's actually got a narrower one layer of cells protecting it from digestion to the lumen, where the rumen's have a more robust structure. So some protocols that if farmers are dealing with summer scour syndrome or vets this year, it's all about early intervention. Our blend is very, very unique. We have come up with we've done a lot of work over, I suppose, the first grazing season with it here. Because calves are out, we try and keep them out. If they have to come in, that's a decision between farmer and vet. But a dose rate of 100 mils daily for 3 to 5 days if they're out. So going in with quite a higher dose for more rapid stabilization in these calves of the liquid, unique pro and postbiotics definitely helps. We've had a lot of questions about prevention in the use of Precision Microbes. A couple of farms fed 50 mils a day per calf for 2 weeks, particularly when they're putting them out on lush pastures through meal. I don't have conclusive evidence or a big cohort like I have on maybe younger calves on the product, so it's something that people will ask me about, but I would say, look, I don't have conclusive evidence on it. The product, if you have calves outdoor, it can be fed through meal as well. So that goes for any calves that have a setback. You can actually put Precision Microbes through the meal if you don't want to be orally dosing calves every day. So it can be given orally or through the meal for the follow-up period, maybe after the first oral dose. So the key thing about Precision Microbes, if you do come across summer scour syndrome, is early intervention. Okay, so that's sort of a niche for Precision Microbes in relation to if we do see summer scour. But look, my whole career over the last number of years is about prevention. So when we look at strategies, I think we have a lot to learn still, but for looking at prevention, some of the focuses need to be on proper weaning, so we have calves with as good rumen development as we can, and that particularly is probably important. The later calves consuming, I'd say a minimum 1.5 kilos concentrate. And then when we think about turning calves out to grass, and we think about that significant change in diet that maybe the grass at this time of year will have for a rumen perspective or even a hindgut perspective, it makes sense that maybe farmers have done various things. So rougher pastures, maybe not the lush grazing, and certainly when you leave a calf out to a big field of grass, being selective grazers, it really does optimize for digestive issues. Strip grazing is working well. I have to say a lot of farms now are strip grazing calves and getting them to go right down to the root of the plant. It requires a bit more work and more regular strip grazing, like that can be every 12 hours. Certainly we know that providing meal has a benefit. The rumen's still developing, so maybe looking at that meal and the constituents of it, that it not just has your energy and your protein, but maybe a fiber source through it. A lot of people now are feeding an extra fiber source because we know the value of fiber, and that can be straw primarily, maybe hay, although again we need to look at that. I know that on some farms in the past we've used chopped straw with molasses through it to try and increase intakes, and that fiber piece definitely seems to help. Here's a picture on the bottom of, I was in Spain about 6 weeks ago, and I was on a sheep and dairy farm, but they were using a meal and straw mixture for the ewes. And I was looking at it and I was saying, wow, that is, if you could feed that to calves over the summer months, really finely chopped straw, so it was only 1 centimeter, and I think it still had the potential of putting in fiber with the meal through it, made it palatable. It was a very interesting feed. These sheep are indoors on this product, and their production, rumen health, was outstanding. So look, there is ways around preventing it. We do need to look towards the future. I think mixed species swards are going to be interesting for a number of reasons. They have their challenges. Potentially with summer scour syndrome, there could be still the element of selective grazing, although I have yet to see a farm, and maybe I've missed something, that has put in mixed species swards and has had this issue in calves. Again, this is not about knocking the grazing system. We've made so much progress, and it's all about progress, not perfection. We're always trying to improve things. So we see conditions like this, we see cows eating stones, we see all these maybe conditions with rumen health and cows, and we have to ask the question, why? How can we improve it? And that's what the future is about. It's about understanding that. But if I was farming in the morning, I certainly would be focusing very, very heavily on soil health. I'll be thinking about the biome of my farm, the soil microbiota, the swards, and that will only benefit the animals in our grazing system. So loads of potential and a very exciting future in the grazing side with the research that I'm seeing coming through as well. Okay. Look, massive thank you to anybody who's taken time to listen to this video. It was supposed to be short, but Tommy can't do things short. Just other updates. Look, we're also promoting our equine product. It's been a phenomenal success. Again, it's a unique blend. It's tested, so it can be used in performance horses and race horses. It's dose dependent. It's a daily dosage, but it's transforming gut health. It's a complementary feed. We were in Gordon Elliott's yard recently. Keane O'Connor and Carlswood, all their horses are on it in Carlswood. They're seeing the benefits. We always value feedback and any questions. So if you have questions about the microbes, about applications, some of the topics I brought up in this video, I'm happy to answer them. info@tommythevet.ie will get me. Look, keep up the great work, everybody out there. To all our customers, huge thanks, and we really appreciate the support. And I think we're game changers in the gut health space. We're tools to aid farmers in an ever evolving landscape in agriculture. So thank you very much for listening to this video.